Hi. Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Uh, to add to his introduction, uh, the Hakawati means a storyteller, and it's a little different than regular storytellers because in our part of the world, there's more sort of the difference between Western performers and Middle Eastern performers, particularly Arabic performance, is audience interaction. Basically, for example, if a storyteller comes up to start to read, people can start heckling. Heckling is encouraged, just don't be mean. I'm too delicate. So it's basically more than just the performers sitting up here and reading. Though audience interaction does not include cell phones. So if you have them, please turn them off. Please. Uh, in any case, the book is a novel. It's a family story, but it's divided into many different stories, and it's always difficult to pick which ones to read. So, forgive me if I pick the wrong ones. I will read either 3 or 4 sections depending on the time. And this is where audience interaction comes in. If you don't want me to read, say, the 4th section, just start going, ugh. Listen. Allow me to be your God. Let me take you on a journey beyond imagining. Let me tell you a story. A long, long time ago, an Amir lived in a distant land, in a beautiful city, a green city with many trees and exquisite gurgling fountains whose sound lulled the citizens to sleep at night. Now, the Emir had everything except for the one thing his heart desired, a son. He had wealth, earned and inherited. His beautiful wife, he had health and good teeth. He had status, charm, respect. His beautiful wife loved him. His clan looked up to him. He had a good pedicurist. 20 years he had been married, 12 lovely girls, but no son. What to do? He called his vizier. Wise vizier, he said, I need your help. My lovely wife has been unable to deliver me a son, as you know. Each of my 12 girls is more beautiful than the other. They have milk-white skin, as smooth as the finest silk from China. The glistening pearls from the Arabian Gulf pale next to their eyes. The luster of their hair outshines the black dyes from the land of Sind. The oldest has 17 poets singing her praises. My daughters have given me much pleasure, much to be proud of. Yet, I yearn to see an offspring with a little penis run around my courtyard, a boy to carry my name and my honor, a future leader of our clan. I am at a loss. My wife says we should try once more, but I cannot put her through all this again for another girl. Tell me, what can I do to ensure a boy? The vizier, for the 1,000th time, suggested his master take a second wife. Before it is too late, my lord, it is obvious that your wife will not produce a boy. We must find someone who will. My liege is the only man within these borders who has only one wife. The Emir had rejected the suggestion countless times, and that day would be no different. He looked wistfully out onto his garden. I cannot marry another, my dear vizier. I am terribly in love with my wife. She can be ornery now and then, vain for sure, petulant and impetuous, silly at times, ill-disposed toward the help, even malicious and malevolent when angry. But still, she has always been the one for me. Then produce a son with one of your slaves. Fatima, the Egyptian, would be an excellent candidate. Her hips are more than adequate. Her breasts have been measured. A tremendous nominee, if I say so myself. But I have no wish to be with another. Sarah offered her Egyptian slave to her husband to produce a boy. If it was good enough for our prophet, it can be good enough for us. That night, in their bedroom, the Emir and his wife discussed their problem. His wife agreed with the vizier. I know you want a son, she said, but I believe it has gone beyond your desires. The situation is dire. Our people talk. All wonder what will happen when you ascend to heaven. Who will lead our tribes? I believe some may wish to ask the question sooner. I will kill them, the emir yelled. I will destroy them. Who dares question how I choose to live my life? Settle down and be reasonable. You can have intercourse with Fatima until she conceives. She is pretty, available, and amenable. We can have our boy through her. But I do not think I can. His wife smiled as she stood. Worry not, husband. I will attend, and I will do that thing you enjoy. I will call Fatima, and we can inform her of what we want. We will set an appointment for Wednesday night, a full moon. When Fatima was told of their intentions, she did not hesitate. I'm always at your service, she said. However, if the emir wishes to have a son with his own wife, there is another way. In my hometown of Alexandria, I know of a woman whose powers are unmatched. She is directly descended, female line, from Ankara herself, Cleopatra's healer and keeper of the asps. If she is given a lock of my mistress's hair, she will be able to see why my mistress has not produced a boy and will give out the appropriate remedy. She never fails. But that is outstanding, the emir exclaimed. You are heaven sent, my dear Fatima. We must fetch this healer right away. Fatima shook her head. Oh no, my lord. A healer can never leave her home. It is where her magic comes from. She would be helpless and useless if she were uprooted. A healer might travel, begin quests, but in the end, to come into her full powers, she can never stray too far from home. I can travel with a lock of my mistress's hair and return with the remedy. Then go you must, the emir's wife said. The emir added, and may God guide you and light your way. So this is the first section, at which time I take a break and drink some water. And as part of the audience interaction, you could just go like this. So this next section, the narrator of the book is Osama. And at this point, he's about 12 or 13. The time is probably 1972, 1973. He had just attended his grandfather's funeral. I assume most of you here know that in the Middle East, whether it's Jewish or Muslim or Christian, or in this case even Druze, funerals tend to be a little bit over the top. Teeny little bit. And the boy is traumatized. So in this section, his uncle, Uncle Jihad, is trying to make him feel better. Are you feeling bad? Asked Uncle Jihad. Was it the funeral? Why did everybody have to shout so much? I asked. Aren't we Druze supposed to have silent funerals? He sipped his drink slowly, seemed to be having a conversation with the ceiling and not me. In principle, but not in practice. For how will the dead know that we love them? You know, darling, funerals used to be much more dramatic when I was your age. Believe it or not, they are quieter now, more sedate. He hummed, took another sip. Why, I can just imagine what they'll be like when you're my age now. Probably no one will show up. Bang, 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 and it's over. Mourners will arrive only if alcohol is being served, like at Irish funerals. By the way, I read this in Ireland. They weren't too pleased. He ran a wash rag over his head. It's only the funeral, my sweet. You know, some people flagellate themselves on the first day, the third day, the week, and the 40th. It's a never-ending process. We have crazy funerals, and that's it. We're much more sane, don't you think? I assumed the question was rhetorical. You're not buying any of this, are you? I shook my head. Well, listen. A long, long time ago, he began, when the Mongol hordes ran amok in our world, when Genghis Khan scorched the deserts of China and plundered the rest of the world, after the barbarian king had burned Baghdad to its final ember, after he massacred 100,000 in Damascus and watched the city's street covered in rivers of blood, after the Mongol general descended upon our fertile lands, my story begins. The general's brother, Tukan, was bored. Tukan, I asked, that's a bad pun. That's not even Syrian good. You'd laugh a lot harder if you were Lebanese. Don't interrupt, my boy, he replied. His eyes aloft still were white set, dark, and revivified. I'm on a roll. Tukan was bored. Bored, not bird? Ah, now that's bad. Listen. Toucan decided to have a feast. He brought the 7 best cooks in the region and demanded that they create the greatest meal that had ever been served. The cooks toiled and slaved and came up with 7 courses. The first course was exquisite, 1 oyster on a bed of lemon puree. Toucan ate it in 1 bite and wept, for the taste was glorious. To ensure that no one else would share the taste and thereby dilute his experience, Toucan had the cook beheaded. The second course was soup, a pork and apple consommé, so thin, so clear, so delectable, and its creator was beheaded. Third was sautéed sandabs, 4th was grilled pheasant, 5th was filet mignon, off with all their heads. The 6th was rack of lamb, of course. Toucan could not believe his tongue. His jaws extended farther, moved toward the plate. Within minutes, his mouth was a hand's width in front of his face. Ah, Toucan, I said. Precisely. And we killed the penultimate cook. Now, the 7th cook was Beiruti. He was no fool and was in no mood to be killed. He made crème brûlée using the milk of cows that had drunk their water. Using the milk of cows that had drunk their water from the Litani River. Toucan had his first bite and wept again. Creamy, smooth, impeccable. But before his second bite, his stomach rumbled. He licked the spoon and his stomach yiked. He had a bowel movement before the third bite and it wouldn't relent, the never-ending stool. Plop, plop, diarrhea, dysentery, Toucan didn't have time to move. He soiled his pants and the glorious paisley-infected textile he'd been sitting on. I'm quite all right, Toucan said, but he really wasn't. He lost 5 kilos within the first hour, 3 more in the second, and another 3 in the third. Rumble, rumble, his stomach wouldn't stop self-evacuating. He refused to sleep sitting up and had his slave place him on the edge of his bed with his ankle in stirrups so his stool could fire out unencumbered. Boom, boom, all night, his diarrhea was so explosive he was hitting the wall across the room, painting an abstract expressionist mural. Nothing great, mind you, mediocre painting informed by Lee Krasner. By morning, Toucan was dead, wasted away into a stickman. The bereaved Jenkins refused to have his brother buried in exile, for his soul would remain on earth, eternally searching for home. Jenkins would bury him with their ancestors. Grief, sadness, sorrow. A Mongol funeral march began. But grief, sadness, and sorrow weren't enough to commemorate a man as great as Toucan. And my uncle's voice grew deeper, more serious. No, it wasn't enough. Along the way, the funeral procession killed every living thing it encountered. Entire villages, cities, men, women, children, generations of babies not yet born, animals, birds, trees, shrubs, flowers, forests. Everything was smashed along the path, from Beirut to Ulaanbaatar, a viscous trail of death and devastation to mark the funereal journey. He gulped the rest of his scotch. I waited for him to say something. I guess we have it better now, I said. He smiled, nodded. I laughed nervously. So, when did he marry Rita Hayworth? Stop that, my uncle laughed. That's another story. Now, you're telling me that Genghis Khan destroyed Beirut as well? I thought it was Hulagu who conquered the Middle East. Should I trust you? Never trust the teller, he said. Trust the tale. So that's the second part. Water break. And I had to apologize, but I need reading glasses now. I got my first letter from the AAFP this week, so I'm a little weirded out. But they're a little difficult to read with reading glasses on stage, so I'm excusing that for my nervousness. Okay. This one does not need an introduction. It's just sort of a short fairy tale. Once, not too long ago, there was a little boy, about the same age as you, who lived with his family in a small village not unlike this one, not too far from here. The family did not have much money. The father was a stonemason. The mother looked after the house, cooked delicious meals. All the children had their own chores to do. Our boy was the family's shepherd. Every morning, he would take the sheep out to pasture. He watched them graze, made sure they did not wander, and protected them from foxes, wolves, and marauding hyenas. The sheep liked him and trusted him, so they didn't stray far from our boy. His job became easy, and every day he had time to play. At first, he played with sticks and stones. He made a sheep pen by staking twigs in four corners. Small stones were his sheep. But then the little lambs came into his make-believe pen, clamoring for his attention. So he stopped playing with sticks and stones and became one of the lambs, jumped with them, bent down and pretended to chew on the wild lavender bushes, bleated with them. When he returned home that evening, he wished he were a lamb, because he had fun playing. Before he went to sleep, he heard his parents arguing about money. "We have so many mouths to feed," the mother said. How can we find enough for all of them?" "We have the sheep," the father said. "We have some money. I am working. We'll survive. We have for generations." "How could you have promised that?" the mother asked. "We don't have enough to feed our children, and now you want to have a feast? Have you no conscience? Don't you understand how bad our situation is?" "How dare you?" the father yelled at the mother. "This is the bay we're talking about. It's an honor. When he comes here, the house will be blessed. I don't understand how you can think of not wanting him in your home. Most people would die for the opportunity." The mother whispered, "What has the bay done for my family?" The father slapped the mother. The boy ran into his room. The father and mother came out of the house together and walked toward the pen. "Danger, danger," said the eldest Jew. "The evil ones are here." "No, no," said our boy. "They are not evil. They are my family." "When those two show up together," another sheep said, "one of us disappears." The father and mother came into the pen. They tried to figure which lamb to pick. "Look at me," the boy yelled. "Look at me. Look at me." "This one," the mother said. "He is noisy." "He looks plump and juicy," the father added. He placed a noose around his boy's head and walked him out of the pen. "The poor lamb," the eldest Jew said, as the sheep watched him being taken away. "Daddy, Daddy," the little lamb said, "I'm a lamb now. Isn't this a miracle?" And his father took out the knife and slit his throat. And the little lamb watched his own blood leave him. And his father cut off his head. And his father hung him from his ankle to drain him. And his mother began to skin him with her own hands. She would lift a small part of his skin, punch between the skin and body, lift, punch, until she finally cut the lash-attached skin at the ankles. And then she chopped off his hands and feet. And she took out all of his insides. And his mother cooked him over a slow-burning fire. His father waited. His mother cooked. His brothers helped set up the large table under the giant oak. His sisters cleaned the house and cleaned and cleaned. They got dressed in all the fineries. By lunchtime, they were lined up waiting. The mother wondered where our boy was. His brothers suggested he must be daydreaming somewhere as usual. He had gotten out of doing the chores, the sneaky brat. The family waited and waited and waited. Finally, the mayor arrived and said that the bay had decided not to come to the village. The lamb was placed in the middle of the table, and the boy felt his father tear into him. "Pass your plates, children," the mother said. "We'll get to have a great meal for a change." And the boy felt his brothers bite into his flesh. He felt his sisters chew sumptuous pieces of him. "This tastes so good," his brother said. "The best meal we've ever had," his sister said. And the mother brought out his stomach. His siblings fought over his intestines. "You take this, my dear," his father told his mother. "I know you love it." "And you take this, my dear," his mother told his father, "for I know you love it." "And I am happy," said the father. "And I am happy," said the mother. And the boy felt his mother bite into his testicles. And the boy felt his father swallow a piece of his heart. And the boy was happy. My psychiatrist told me not to read this. Okay, so last one. This last one is narrated by Uncle Jihad. he's telling Osama about when he was a little boy. So Uncle Jihad is probably around 12 or 13. The time in Beirut is 1943. So he's recalling his days with pigeons. My father has his pigeon stories, and I have mine. For life, like a good tale, repeats itself. I noticed my first flock of pigeons in the skies of Beirut when I was a boy of 13. They were always there, but like most people, I'd been oblivious. Notice their existence once, and you begin to see them everywhere, all the time. I saw my first flock, and 10 minutes later I saw my second, and then my third and fourth, and all of a sudden, my skies brimmed with pigeons. One afternoon, while admiring a flock in flight, I began to guess at the presence of magic. I was able to discern the art, as well as the logic, of flight patterns. The realization was both gradual and instantaneous. Magic. And as soon as I had my epiphany, my eyes understood where to look for the locus of the sorcery. Though I couldn't see him, the wizard himself must have been on the roof of the 3-story old building below the school. The following afternoon, I ran to the building and asked about the pigeons. The shopkeeper on the ground floor told me to go up to the roof. The pigeon fancier, an aged man, realized I was a smitten boy. He allowed me to walk and look at his prize collections. There were 5 cages on the roof, each of them bigger than my bedroom. One cage had young pigeons of different breeds, another had only coupled pigeons. One was empty because the birds were being flown. I walked around and fell in love. I wanted to say something clever so that the pigeoneer would like me and I'd be able to visit again, but my mind was numb. He was obviously a gentleman, but I wonder whether he let me come up a second time or a third. Wouldn't he quickly tire of a young boy who wanted to spend time with pigeons? I got scared and stuttered, "Can I work for you?" The pigeoneer looked me up and down. He smiled and shook his head no. He said I was too young and obviously from too good of a family to work for him. I went from taciturn to loquacious in less than a second. I told him that I could come every day after classes. He was only a few meters from the school, and I was a fast learner and would do whatever he asked and never complain, so that I looked like I was from a good family because I was going to a good school, but I was from the mountains and my family was still up there, and I really wanted to make pigeons fly. And he should try me out. It became obvious that he was trying his best not to laugh out loud. He said he could only afford 1 lira a week, which was a fortune, and he knew it. Had I walked away when he told me he wouldn't hire me, I would have failed the first test. He always said he knew the instant I came to the roof that I would end up a pigeoneer, that he saw it in the obsessive twinkle in my eye. The man's name was Ali Aitani. He was a Shiite, and he owned the old building. I showed up to work the following afternoon and found him arguing vociferously with Kamal Horani, a man who looked like his identical twin, except he was a Catholic. "You brother of a whore wouldn't know what honor was if it smacked you on the side of the head," one would say. And the other would reply, "Honor? You lowlife want to talk to me about honor?" They were both 71 at the time, and they wore the exact same clothes, except for the shoes. Checkered navy blue shirts and tailored pants that were worn and frayed. Ali's shoes were black moccasins, whereas Kamal's were burgundy, both pairs comfortably needed by years of wear. Though their insults were getting worse and worse, they were standing close to each other in a relaxed posture. My Sherlock Holmes mind reasoned that their arguing was a common occurrence. It turned out that Ali Aitani and Kamal Horani had been best friends since they were 6 years old. They both swore to me that they had been insulting each other nonstop since 1898. They had lived through schooling, work, marriage, family rearing, widowhood, 2 occupying powers, 1 great war, numerous small wars, religious conflicts, and independence without ever thinking of ceasing their rude insults. I felt I had entered the garden. This was my first interaction with the great city of Beirut. Of course, I had been living there for over 7 years, since I was 5, but it seemed that I had only been a tourist. Like all cities, Beirut had many layers, and I had been familiar with 1 or 2. what I was introduced to that day with Ali and Kamal was the Beirut of its people. You take different groups, put them on top of each other, simmer for 1,000 years, keep adding more and more strange tribes, simmer for another few thousand years, salt and pepper with religion, and what you get is a delightful mess of a stew that still tastes delectable and exotic no matter how many times you partake of it. These men seem to have been together for eons, and since they'd run out of conversation long ago, all that was left was ribbing and mockery and repeating the great tales to each other. At the first lull in the faux shouting match, Ali noticed me standing there and pointed at me. He said, "This is the young man I told you about." Without even allowing him to finish the sentence, Kamal yelled, "Run away, young pup! Run as fast as your legs can take you! Stay away from this invertebrate of a man whose only intention is to worm his life into the life of his betters and feed on their loves, for he has none of their own." See, I told you I had found home. Of course, Ali told me to ignore Kamal and began to explain my duties. I had assumed I'd be cleaning up after the pigeons and feeding them, but he already had another boy for that. No, he surprised me. He wanted me to seduce the birds. A confounding task, if I say so myself. "Make them fall in love with you," Ali said. "I want the pigeons to want to return home for you." I had no idea what he was talking about. I must have stood there staring at him like a fool, which elicited gales of laughter from the two old coots. "Don't worry, young pup," Kamal said. "You'll soon understand Lazy Brain's speech. He wants you to go into the cages with the birds and get them used to you. It's another one of those easy tasks that Lazy Brain can't master." So my job was to be with the pigeons, spend time in the cages. That's what I understood, and that's what I did for the first few days. I'd show up after school. The elderly twins would be chatting up a storm and arguing about little things and big things. I thought at first that there was nothing that they could agree on, but I was wrong, of course. They could both agree that it was a lot of fun to tease me. Are you loving those two tumblers enough?" Kamal would ask. And Ali would add, "Look at that lemon. She seems to be moping because you're not paying enough attention to her." I'd get so flustered that I'd walk to the pigeons they were talking about, and the pigeons would move out of my reach. I thought I could never get them to love me. Yes, I was that gullible. There was a wonderful pair of Istanbuls that I admired a great deal, beautiful to look at, dark gray feathers speckled with white, and an orange chest that seemed to have been inflated with an air pump. They'd grown to an immense size, as big as chickens. They were inseparable, and the cock seemed totally smitten with his maid. He'd coo to her, and she loved it. 4 or 5 days after I had started, I was watching them, and my world seemed to shrink to the size of those lovers. She strolled up on the ground, jerkily pecking its seeds, and he followed her every step, cooing and engrossed. She stopped and turned toward him, and he nuzzled her neck. Then he started to stroll, and she followed. "You're beautiful," I said to them. I realized that I had spoken out loud to a pair of birds. I looked around, and the twins seemed bemused. "You do know how to pick your boys," Kamal said to Ali. It was the first time I'd heard one address the other without a slur. After that, the volcano released its pressure, and I began to talk to the pigeons incessantly. I talked to them about everything. I told them how lovely they were. I warned them of the dangers of the world, complimented them on their choice of partners. I talked, and Ali and Kamal had found the boy who was going to entertain them for a long time. The pigeons did respond. They may not have understood a word I said, but they began to enjoy the sound of my voice. When I ran out of things to say, I'd just prattle. And you can probably figure out what happened. I talked, and one day I started on what I do best. For my audience, pigeons and humans, I began to tell stories. Thank you. I collected stories by reading a lot and hearing a lot. I'm always asked, is there anybody in my family who's a Hakawati? And no, my grandfather was a medical doctor. My grandmother plays bridge. I've never had a Hakawati. I've never heard one. I've never listened to one. I made all that up. I don't know anything about pigeons. or the oud or guitar or anything. I make all that up. I read a lot. What I was interested was hearing family stories. So when I got to Lebanon, I told a friend that I'm writing a book. Actually, I'd been writing it for a while, but once I figured out that it was a book of structured around storytelling. I told a friend that I'm looking for family stories. Within about 2 weeks, I started getting phone calls from people I had no idea who they were, who claimed to be my family, and they wanted to tell me stories. My aunts told me stories. I was hearing stories left and right. So a lot of them were included in the book. The other stories came from, Shakespeare, Ovid's Metamorphoses, 1001 Nights. I read a lot. I steal from other writers. So there's a family story. Then there are two main stories. One is the story of Fatima, and one is the story of Baybars. Baybars is a traditional Hakawati tale. I started from the real one because I was lucky enough to find an actual book of Hakawati. It was so confusing, but it took me a long time to figure out that it was written by about 5 different people, at least. So I knew the standard story. I started with the standard story and then took it in a completely different tangent. The other story is the story of Fatima. And the Fatima story is based on many myths, but it's my creation. The descent into the underworld is the goddess Inanna and the goddess Ishtar story. It's repeated in, it's Persephone and Demeter going into the underworld. It's the same story as Sigourney Weaver as aliens going to the bottom. It's the same story. They always go down. So I started with that, and then taking Majnun and Layla and working with that, and the twins. These are all sort of from various tales and fairy tales. But that was my creation. I wanted to do this thing where I wanted to get a Hakawati tale and make it my own, change it completely, and then get another tale and that sort of I created and make it sound like it's a Hakawati tale, just for the hell of it. The Uncle Jihad answers this a couple of times. Oh, no. You haven't got why they sent him to France yet? Yeah. Viziers are always evil because you need evil. You need something to counteract. Otherwise, you don't have a story. So you need something. And the vizier is always sort of ambitious and wants power. Just think of George Bush. There are a lot of jokes that are just meant for me. It's like there are some jokes that only Lebanese would understand, some jokes that only an American would understand, only someone who speaks French. There's like a reference to Melanie Griffith that every time I look at it, I laugh. Nobody gets it. But my favorite sort of inside joke was the king's judge. So he's sort of the vizier. And he was born in Portugal. And then comes to the Muslim empire and creates all this havoc and gets all these Western kings to invade Egypt, and so he's from Portugal, so I called him Arbusto, which is bush in Portuguese. It's good to laugh, it's like laughing at myself and laughing with myself, because sometimes I think that nobody gets me, so I just sit and it's the instinct, I've listened to. I always joke that for us Lebanese, breathing is storytelling. Whatever happens, somebody will sneeze and somebody will have a story about it, and so it comes naturally to us. But there's also this. More important is what I would call editors. I have really good friends who read my work before it even goes to an editor. And because the first draft of this was 1,300 pages. Okay, and I seriously thought that, there's nothing wrong with that. And I thought it was all exciting, So luckily, I had friends who slapped me around a little bit, and that's seriously before it goes to the editor. And then I was lucky enough to work with two great editors. One who's a friend that I sent to her, and then they ganged up on me. And I'm a terrible, terrible, terrible person. I argued, and I hate to admit it now after all this time that they were right. But especially for a writer like me, I need it because I'm in my head all the time. I have no social life. And this is not trying to get sympathy. Unless somebody who's willing to go out on a date is not. It's true. What goes on in my head, I think, is really clear for everybody, which is why I was a horrible, horrible teacher. But luckily, like I said, I have good friends who are all good readers, and I give one to somebody. I have my friend Asa, who's he coins himself the language Nazi. He will go through any time a word sounds out of place or something. I have another who goes for plot. She's really good. She's a good writer and can pace. So I could give my book every now and then to somebody and see what they think. So it starts getting. But even the 1,300 pages, I never gave it till I sent it to my agent. And then just good editors. Yes, there's been. It's still nothing really, but there's been quite a few. It's like Ilyas Khoury still is great writer from the Middle East. There's a big boom in Iranian writing, and we've gone beyond what I'd call the shadow rippers. So we've gotten some really wonderful books from Iran. We have Hanan al-Sheikh's new memoir. So there's been. It's still the trouble for me is not that. This is a long discussion. What I still find troubling is that my book is still viewed as exotic. And in many ways it is exotic, but it's not exotic because it's from the Middle East. It's exotic because I'm weird. It's like when people discuss, say, American books, my book would hardly come into the discussion. We still have this. We're getting published, we're getting heard, and actually, in many ways, we're getting more publicity because we're exotic. But it would be interesting one day, to say Junot Diaz is a great American writer. It's not an immigrant literature. He's an American writer. I'm an American writer. I'm also a Lebanese writer and an Asian writer. And anything that will help sell my book. It's these little corners that we're always placed in that I find troubling, and I don't kid myself. The only reason that this book has gotten publicity is because it's supposed to open doors to the Arab world. Well, I don't care to open doors to the Arab world. I'm writing a book. That's a sort of a second or a secondary benefit. The New York Times review, bless Lorraine, she was amazing. But then think about it for a second. It said that the book is a bridge to the Arab soul. There's one Arab soul, and my book is a bridge. So it is seriously. It was an amazing review, and I really appreciate it. And for most people, that's what they see, that I opened the world to Lebanon. Well, what if I tell you that, the Hakawati that is in here is all my imagination. The Beirut that's in here is my imagination. The Beirut is in my mind is not the same as the Beirut as it exists. You'd probably have to read about at least 50 Lebanese writers to get a glimpse of, just like you wouldn't say, if you want to know about America, read Philip Roth. But we have no problem saying that about, other books, which again, it's also still great because, yes, read my book, you'll learn about Lebanon, yes. But it's an interesting thing where we are getting more published, but I still think that we're still looked at separately. And that's not necessarily a bad thing in terms of sales, because we're sold, and the reason there's any interest in my book, as opposed to other great books that don't get, is because it's Lebanese. But sometimes I wonder how damaging that is. Oh, because they're great. I mean, the whole idea of a frame tale is wonderful. Some of the best literature. In terms of, say, 1001 Nights, I love the fact that everybody thinks it's an Arabic story. And the truth is, 1001 Night is the first global literature we've ever had, because stories were brought from all over the place. Aladdin is Chinese. It's Indian. Shahrazad is an Iranian name. It has nothing to do sort of with, but it's considered the Arabian tales. So I love the fact that but you have, whether it's Boccaccio's the Decameron, or the Canterbury Tales, or so they've been around. There's nothing new in terms of what I did. Why I chose that as a structure is because I love it. It gave me permission to do things that I wouldn't do otherwise. Also, it took me 4 years of work not knowing what the hell I was doing. So I took the first easy out. Oh, sitting on a deathbed, yes. Part of the 1,300 pages that were cut, about 150 were more, around the deathbed and suffering and sick. But I thought that was important. But yeah, it's stories are in many ways universal. If you pick them up, we're told. I mean, one of my favorite lines, and I can't remember where I read it, was, the first conquest of Mexico, and there was a priest there, and he wrote back to the Pope saying that they make fun of our tales, because they had the virgin birth, they had the sacrifice of Christ, everything except for the Catholic who was seeing this. So they're making fun of it, but it was the same stories. So I love that. I also like the differences in terms of, what makes, if we have the same stories, why do we hate each other so much? And it's differences, and every storyteller cannot keep his hands off a story. If I tell a story, I will tell it. I'll start adding things and making things up, and then what starts to happen is that people believe these stories, and so they start emphasizing the differences instead of what's at the core. No, we were, for the most part, we're a family of readers, and mostly on my mother's side. I grew up first in Kuwait, and there was nothing whatsoever. At that time it was just pure desert, and my mother stayed at home. So most of my early memories where she sits in one corner, I sit in another, and we'd read. And in many ways, I read anything that came into my, at first it was comics. I actually do believe that. I believe that we get all of our stories sort of before we're 10, before, I'd say even earlier than that. Those are the stories that leave their marks. But with me, my mother was around. My father was not. He had to work. And I am in many ways now grateful. But we were both separate, because we were immigrants in Kuwait, so I didn't have the family. But in the summer, we would move to Beirut and the mountains, and then I'd be part of the huge family. And I'm talking cousins and second cousins, and so my aunts would tell stories constantly, and they would, for the Lebanese, like I said, one of my favorite things is gossip. They gossip like crazy. They can tell you. I was doing a reading in New York, and this woman came up, and asked to see me, and I went to see her, and I I recognized the name, and she was a relative, and I called, afterwards I called my mom. She told me every single thing that has happened to her in her life. and it becomes a tale, how she got divorced, why she left him, and we don't know whether it's true or not. And my mother is not that much of a, she's not a great storyteller. If I call her my aunt, she'd probably make it really good. But then, she told me about her sons and what her sons were doing, and that she hasn't seen her in 25 years. So all these stories, sort of, I've heard them when I was a kid. So yes, but they weren't storytellers in the sense of the word. So I grew up, in a huge family, and at the same time I grew up separate. So I was reading a lot because there was nothing better to do. And I mean, by the age of 12, I read Harold Robbins, Jacqueline Suzanne.
You went to French schools?
No, I went to English schools. I went to an American school. And then at 15, I went to England. And at 17, I packed my bags and came over here. I mean, The House for Mr. Biswas is the book that shocked the hell out of me. I mean, I read it at 16, and I was alone in a school in England, and I hated everybody, and I still hate everybody. But and I was a foreigner, and to read a novel where the main characters are third worlders, just like I am, and that their life mattered just as much as it was. I mean, to understand, you have to remember the times and what it was like. His book was a revelation for me. I mean, I can't think of. Well, if you ask me tomorrow, I'll tell you of a different book, and the day after, I'll tell you a different book. But that was one of the seminal books for me. And I don't care whether he's a jerk or not, because I met him and he is. But because I didn't have any models. In our part of the world, there were two careers. And if you're going to go to university, you'd either go to medical school or engineering school, and this, I mean, this is not a put down. If your parents were rich and you were stupid, they would send you to a liberal arts college. There was no possibility of anything else. I was good in math. I went into engineering. I mean, I didn't know at the time, but whereas all the other Lebanese were taking, simple electives, I was taking Shakespeare, and I was because I enjoyed it. But I had never occurred to me that I could take a degree in anything other than engineering. It never occurred to me. And then the next was I got an MBA because I was stupid enough to think that I didn't want to do engineering. I hated it. That I could get out of it, and the only program that I could get into that I would not have to take an undergraduate class in was an MBA. I got my master's degree. I was 23 or 24. I really didn't. I didn't think I had any other options. I had no clue that anything like this could be done. So it took a long time. It took a long time for me sort of to find the courage to, and I knew that anything that I would write would be, slightly offensive. So I was scared for a long time until one day I got dumped, and my revenge was a book. Yes.
What language do you write in?
English. And like I said, I'm in many ways I am an American, and I can say it easier now with this administration. Actually, there's a great story, by the way, in the New York Times today about Michelle Obama's ancestry, and it's really stunning. But anyway, yes, I can't write in Arabic. It's a very difficult language. I could read, of course, but it's the classical Arabic is not the language that I think in at all. So I think in English. I sometimes can think in French, and I think in Lebanese, basically, the best way to describe it. And we can't write in Lebanese, really.